The fight begins. Maya Henderson stood on the courthouse steps, the morning chill biting against her cheeks as she adjusted her scarf over her swollen belly. She was 8 months pregnant, and every step was a challenge. Yet the weight in her heart was heavier than the physical strain. Today, she wasn't just fighting for herself or her unborn child. She was standing against a giant, a pharmaceutical corporation with billions of dollars and an army of lawyers. The sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows on the courthouse's massive stone facade. The building loomed, its imposing structure reminding Maya of the battles she had faced to get here. Her hands trembled slightly as she cradled her belly. "For you," she whispered, addressing her unborn child. "And for all the others they've hurt." She inhaled deeply, summoning every ounce of courage she had. Maya's journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Months of physical hardship, legal battles, and sleepless nights had prepared her for this day. She had once been a thriving nurse with dreams of opening her own clinic, but that dream shattered when she became one of the countless victims of Lynx Labs, a pharmaceutical company that had distributed a harmful medication. The drug had caused complications in pregnant women, leaving a trail of devastated lives in its wake. Maya had been prescribed the drug during her early pregnancy, and the side effects had been severe, putting both her life and her baby's at risk. Maya's heart raced as she walked into the courthouse. The air inside was thick with murmurs, and the tapping of heels on polished marble floors. Lawyers shuffled papers, reporters exchanged hushed conversations, and spectators filled the benches, their eyes flickering toward Maya as she entered the room. Her presence drew stares, not just because of her visibly pregnant figure, but because of her audacity to challenge a corporation as powerful as Lynx Labs. At the plaintiff's table, Maya met the sharp gaze of Victor Grayson, the corporation's lead attorney. His reputation preceded him, a ruthless, cunning lawyer who left no stone unturned to crush his opponents. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, Grayson exuded confidence as he exchanged smirks with his team. Maya's stomach churned, but she refused to let him see her fear. Beside her sat Lisa Carter, her fiery lawyer with a track record of taking on cases no one else dared to touch. Lisa placed a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "You've got this," Lisa whispered, her tone steady. Maya nodded, though her palms were slick with sweat. She focused on steadying her breathing as the bailiff announced, "All rise." The room fell silent as Judge Conrad entered. He was an imposing figure, with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that earned him the nickname Iron Hammer. His reputation as a stern and often unyielding judge made Maya uneasy. As he settled into his seat, his gaze lingered on her, an unreadable expression flickering across his face. Maya couldn't tell if it was disdain, curiosity, or indifference. "Order in the court," the judge commanded. "We will now begin proceedings in the case of Henderson versus Lynx Labs." Lisa rose first, delivering a powerful opening statement. Her voice was clear and impassioned as she laid out the facts. The harmful effects of Lynx Labs' drug, the company's negligence in testing, and the human cost of their greed. Maya watched as the jury listened intently, some nodding slightly at Lisa's words. For the first time in months, hope stirred in her chest. But then it was Grayson's turn. He strode confidently to the center of the room, addressing the jury with the charm of a seasoned showman. His tone was smooth, almost hypnotic, as he painted Maya as an opportunist looking to exploit a tragic coincidence for financial gain. His words were sharp, his demeanor dismissive, and every subtle glance he threw in Maya's direction felt like a challenge. "She will say she suffered," Grayson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But what we have here is not a case of corporate negligence. It's a case of someone trying to profit from misfortune." Maya clenched her fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. Anger boiled in her veins, but she forced herself to stay composed. She couldn't let him provoke her. The first day of testimony was grueling. Witnesses presented evidence, some supporting Maya's claims, while others, expert witnesses hired by Lynx Labs, painted a picture of corporate compliance and responsibility. The company had spared no expense in crafting their defense. Every piece of evidence Lisa presented was met with objections and interruptions from Grayson, and Judge Conrad frequently sided with the defense. As the day wore on, Maya felt the weight of the courtroom pressing down on her. The harsh fluorescent lights, the relentless questioning, and the icy stares from the defense team were almost too much to bear. During a brief recess, she stepped outside to catch her breath. The crisp autumn air was a welcome relief as she sat on a bench, her hands resting on her belly. "You're braver than most," a voice said, startling her. Maya turned to see an older woman sitting nearby. She had kind eyes and a notebook in her lap. "I've been covering trials for years," the woman continued. "Cases like yours aren't easy, but it's people like you who change the system." Maya managed a weak smile. "It doesn't feel like I'm changing anything right now." The woman nodded. "Truth has a way of shining through. Don't give up." Her words stayed with Maya as she returned to the courtroom. But the afternoon session was no easier. Grayson's cross-examination of her witnesses was brutal, and Judge Conrad's impatience with Lisa's questioning grew more apparent. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the odds were stacked against her. When the court adjourned for the day, Maya sat in her chair, exhausted and disheartened. Lisa placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't let them get to you," she said. "This is just the beginning. We'll fight harder tomorrow." But as Maya left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and onlookers, a single thought lingered in her mind. What if tomorrow isn't enough? Her fight was far from over. The next day would test her resolve in ways she could never have imagined. A day of reckoning. The courthouse was alive with activity the next morning, a buzzing hive of reporters, lawyers, and onlookers eager to witness the unfolding drama. Maya Henderson stood in the shadows of the towering building, her hands resting protectively on her rounded belly. Every instinct told her to flee, to retreat from the overwhelming pressure, but she knew she couldn't. The fight wasn't just for her, it was for her unborn child, and for every family harmed by the reckless greed of Lynx Labs. Lisa Carter met her on the steps, a cup of herbal tea in one hand and a thick binder of documents in the other. Her fiery lawyer had a way of exuding confidence, even in the face of adversity. Maya found solace in Lisa's unwavering determination. "You ready?" Lisa asked, offering the tea. "As ready as I'll ever be," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. She took the tea and sipped it, the warmth grounding her. Inside, the courtroom was even more crowded than the day before. Seats were filled with journalists scribbling notes, spectators whispering among themselves, and the defense team, who radiated smugness. Victor Grayson sat at the defense table, reviewing his notes with a self-satisfied grin. His confidence was infuriating, but Maya refused to let him intimidate her. The bailiff called the court to order, and everyone rose as Judge Conrad entered. His stern expression was the same as ever, his eyes scanning the room before landing briefly on Maya. She felt a flicker of unease at his lingering gaze, but she pushed it aside. Lisa began the day by presenting a critical witness, Dr. Elena Monroe, a former research scientist for Lynx Labs. Dr. Monroe's testimony had the potential to shift the momentum of the trial. She had worked on the development of the medication at the center of the case and had left the company under suspicious circumstances. Dr. Monroe, a composed woman in her 40s with sharp features and piercing eyes, took the stand. As Lisa began her questioning, the courtroom fell silent, the air charged with anticipation. "Dr. Monroe," Lisa began, her tone calm but firm, "can you describe your role at Lynx Labs during the development of the medication in question?" Dr. Monroe nodded. "I was a senior researcher responsible for overseeing clinical trials and analyzing data." "And did you observe any issues during these trials?" "Yes," Dr. Monroe said, her voice steady. "Early trials showed significant side effects, particularly in pregnant women. I raised concerns with my superiors, but those concerns were dismissed." Maya's heart swelled with hope. This was the truth she had been waiting for. "Why were your concerns dismissed?" Lisa pressed. Dr. Monroe hesitated, her expression darkening. Because addressing them would have delayed the drug's release and cost the company millions in revenue. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense team shifted in their seats, and Victor Grayson's confident demeanor faltered for a moment. Lisa continued, "And what did you do when your concerns were ignored?" "I documented everything and escalated my findings to the board of directors," Dr. Monroe replied. "When that didn't work, I resigned. I couldn't be part of something that put lives at risk." Lisa turned to the jury, her voice rising with passion. "Dr. Monroe, would you say that Lynx Labs prioritized profits over safety?" "Yes," Dr. Monroe said firmly. "Without a doubt." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Maya felt a surge of vindication, but the moment was short-lived. Grayson stood, his expression cool and calculating. "Your Honor," he began, "permission to cross-examine." Judge Conrad nodded. "Proceed." Grayson approached the witness stand, his movements deliberate. "Dr. Monroe," he said smoothly, "you mentioned that you resigned from Lynx Labs. Wasn't your resignation actually due to a personal conflict with your supervisor?" Dr. Monroe's jaw tightened. "No, it was because of the ethical violations I just described." Grayson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yet you have no formal documentation proving these so-called violations, do you?" "I submitted reports to the board." "Reports that conveniently disappeared," Grayson interrupted. "Isn't it true, Dr. Monroe, that you left Lynx Labs under a cloud of suspicion, and now you're using this trial to settle a personal vendetta?" Dr. Monroe's composure cracked, and Maya's heart sank. Grayson's strategy was clear: discredit the witness, shift the focus, and cast doubt. The jury's expressions were mixed, some sympathetic, others skeptical. Lisa stood to redirect, but Judge Conrad cut her off. "Let's move on, Ms. Carter. We've heard enough from this witness." Lisa's frustration was palpable, but she nodded, her professional demeanor intact. Maya felt the weight of the judge's words. It was becoming increasingly clear that he was not impartial. His dismissive tone, his interruptions, everything pointed to bias. The rest of the day was a grueling battle. Lisa presented emails from Lynx Labs executives discussing how to manage the public's reaction to the medication's side effects. The evidence was damning, but Grayson countered with claims of taken out of context and standard corporate procedures. As the hours dragged on, Maya began to feel the physical toll. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and waves of nausea washed over her. She focused on her breathing, reminding herself why she was fighting. "For you," she whispered to her unborn child. "For us." Late in the afternoon, Lisa called Maya to the stand. The room seemed to hold its breath as Maya rose, her steps slow but purposeful. Taking the oath, she felt a rush of emotion. This was her chance to tell her story. Lisa's questions were gentle at first, guiding Maya through her experience. Maya spoke of the joy she felt when she discovered she was pregnant, the excitement of planning for her baby's future, and the devastating moment she learned that the medication she had been prescribed could harm her child. Her voice trembled, but she refused to let the tears fall. "I trusted my doctor," Maya said, her gaze sweeping over the jury. "I trusted that the medication was safe. But Lynx Labs took that trust and betrayed it. They put profits above people." The jury's expressions softened, some nodding in understanding. But then it was Grayson's turn. "Ms. Henderson," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "isn't it true that you only filed this lawsuit after consulting with a high-profile lawyer known for targeting corporations?" "No," Maya replied firmly. "I filed this lawsuit because I want justice, for me, for my baby, and for everyone else who has been hurt." Grayson smirked. "Justice, or a big payout?" The courtroom was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya clenched the edges of the witness stand, her nails digging into the wood. She felt a sharp pain in her abdomen, but she ignored it. She wouldn't let him break her. "I want accountability," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. Money can't fix what they've done, but maybe this lawsuit will stop them from hurting someone else. Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but Maya's body betrayed her. The pain intensified, and she gasped, clutching her belly. The room erupted into chaos. "Your Honor, we need a recess," Lisa shouted, rushing to Maya's side. Judge Conrad hesitated, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. Recess granted. As Maya was escorted out, she caught a glimpse of Grayson's smug expression. Her resolve hardened. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for her dignity, her child, and her future. And she wasn't done fighting yet. The judge's mask begins to slip. Maya sat in the hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors filling the room. The dim light cast long shadows on the pale green walls, and the cool air prickled her skin. She pressed a hand to her swollen belly, feeling the faint but reassuring movements of her baby. Despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, Maya's resolve hadn't wavered. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. Lisa Carter entered the room, a takeout coffee cup in one hand and a stack of documents in the other. Her usual fiery energy was tempered by concern as she pulled a chair to Maya's bedside. "How are you feeling?" Lisa asked, setting the coffee down. "I've been better," Maya admitted, her voice hoarse. "But I'm not giving up." Lisa smiled faintly. "That's the spirit. But we need to be strategic. After today, I've been digging into something that might explain why this case feels like an uphill battle." Maya raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Lisa flipped open a file and handed Maya a printout. It was an old newspaper article, faded but legible. The headline read, "Local Judge's Family Tied to Lynx Labs Boardroom." Judge Conrad's brother, Martin Conrad, was a high-ranking executive at Lynx Labs. Lisa explained. "He passed away a few years ago, but their connection runs deep. I did some digging, and the judges ruled in favor of corporations in almost every case like ours. It's not a coincidence." Maya stared at the article, her hands trembling. "You're saying he's biased?" Lisa nodded. "It's highly likely, but proving judicial bias isn't easy. We'll need solid evidence, and even then, it's risky. If we push too hard and fail, it could jeopardize the entire case." Maya's jaw tightened. "So what do we do?" Lisa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We keep going, but I'm going to lay the groundwork to expose his bias. It's a delicate dance. We can't accuse him outright without proof, but we can start raising questions." Maya nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. "Do whatever it takes. I won't let them win because the system is rigged." The next morning, Maya returned to the courthouse. Despite the doctor's orders to rest, she knew she couldn't afford to miss a day. The reporters were out in full force, their cameras flashing as she walked up the steps. Whispers followed her, but Maya kept her head high, focusing on the path ahead. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with energy. Victor Grayson and his team were already seated, exuding their usual smug confidence. Lisa was waiting for Maya at their table, flipping through her notes. She offered a quick nod of encouragement as Maya sat down. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Conrad entered. His expression was as cold and detached as ever, his sharp gaze briefly settling on Maya before moving on. Lisa wasted no time diving into the day's proceedings. She called her next witness, Dr. Sarah Lang, a medical researcher who had conducted independent studies on the effects of the medication in question. Dr. Lang's testimony was clear and concise, presenting undeniable evidence of the drug's harmful effects. "This medication was rushed to market," Dr. Lang explained, her voice steady. "Clinical trials were incomplete, and the risks were downplayed. The data shows a clear link between the drug and severe complications in pregnant women." Maya felt a flicker of hope as the jury listened intently. Even Judge Conrad seemed to be paying closer attention, though his expression remained unreadable. Victor Grayson, however, was quick to counter. He approached the stand with his trademark arrogance, his questions designed to sow doubt. "Dr. Lang," he began, his tone condescending, Isn't it true that your research was funded by organizations known to be critical of the pharmaceutical industry? Dr. Lang met his gaze without flinching. My research was funded by independent grants with no vested interest in this case. But those organizations have a history of opposing corporations like Lynx Labs, don't they? Grayson pressed. They have a history of advocating for public safety. Dr. Lang shot back, her voice firm. Which is what this case is about. Grayson's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. No further questions, he said, returning to his seat. Lisa stood for redirect, her tone sharp. Dr. Lang, can you confirm that your findings were peer-reviewed and published in respected medical journals? Yes, Dr. Lang replied. My research was thoroughly vetted and confirmed by multiple experts in the field. Lisa nodded. Thank you. No further questions. As the morning session continued, Lisa presented more evidence. Internal emails, financial reports, and testimonies from other victims. Each piece added to the damning portrait of Lynx Labs as a corporation driven by profit at any cost. But the tension in the courtroom was palpable, and Judge Conrad's demeanor grew increasingly impatient. He interrupted Lisa's questioning multiple times, his tone curt and dismissive. Miss Carter, get to the point. He snapped at one point. This court doesn't have time for theatrics. Lisa bit her tongue, her frustration evident but controlled. Maya, however, felt her blood boil. The judge's bias was becoming more blatant, and it was clear he was trying to undermine their case. During the afternoon session, Maya was called back to the stand. Her heart pounded as she took her seat, but she focused on Lisa's reassuring presence. Lisa began with gentle questions, guiding Maya through her story. Maya spoke of the joy she felt when she discovered she was pregnant, the excitement of preparing for her baby, and the devastation of learning about the medication's risks. Her voice trembled with emotion, but she refused to let the tears fall. I trusted the system, Maya said, her gaze sweeping over the jury. I trusted my doctor, and I trusted that the medication was safe. But Lynx Labs betrayed that trust. They put profits above people, and my baby, and I paid the price. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Even the jury seemed moved, their expressions softening. But then it was Grayson's turn. Miss Henderson, he began, his tone icy. You claim to be seeking justice, but isn't it true that you were approached by a lawyer who specializes in high-profile lawsuits? Maya's hands gripped the edges of the witness stand. No, I filed this lawsuit because I want accountability, not money. Grayson smirked. Accountability, or a financial windfall. Maya's resolve didn't waver. Money can't undo the harm they've caused. But maybe this case will stop them from hurting someone else. The jury's eyes were fixed on her, their expressions a mix of sympathy and skepticism. Maya's heart pounded, but she held her ground. As the day drew to a close, tensions reached a boiling point. Lisa presented one final piece of evidence, a leaked memo from Lynx Labs executives discussing how to downplay the risks of the medication. The memo was damning, but Grayson immediately objected. Your Honor, this is irrelevant, he argued. The plaintiff is trying to distract the jury with baseless accusations. Judge Conrad sighed heavily, his irritation clear. Sustained. Ms. Carter, move on. Lisa opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself. Instead, she turned to Maya and whispered, We'll get them. Stay strong. Maya nodded, her determination renewed. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for justice. And no matter how hard they tried to silence her, she wouldn't back down. The battle was far from over, but Maya felt a spark of hope. The truth was on her side, and she was ready to see this fight through to the end. Unveiling the truth. The next day, the courtroom atmosphere was tense, as if everyone knew that the trial was teetering on the edge of a pivotal moment. Maya sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. The stress and fatigue weighed heavily on her, but her resolve remained steadfast. Today was a new day, and she would face it with courage. Lisa Carter was already deep in preparation, flipping through her notes and reviewing the game plan for the day. She glanced at Maya and offered a reassuring smile. "Today, we're going to shake things up," she said confidently. Maya nodded, though she didn't ask for details. She trusted Lisa implicitly and knew her lawyer had something significant planned. The courtroom doors opened, and the audience filtered in, journalists, spectators, and supporters alike. Maya noticed a few new faces, their presence adding to the growing buzz of curiosity and tension. As Judge Conrad entered and called the court to order, Lisa stood immediately, her posture confident and commanding. "Your Honor, before we proceed with today's testimony, I'd like to submit a motion," Lisa said, her voice firm. Judge Conrad's brow furrowed. "A motion? At this stage, explain yourself, Miss Carter." Lisa stepped forward, holding a folder in her hand. "I have evidence that calls into question the impartiality of this court. Specifically, a potential conflict of interest involving your connection to the defendant, Linkslavs." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Maya's heart raced as Judge Conrad's face darkened, his usual calm exterior giving way to visible irritation. "You tread on dangerous ground, Miss Carter," the judge said coldly. "Present your evidence carefully." Lisa nodded, her expression resolute. "Your Honor, this document shows that your late brother, Martin Conrad, was a senior executive at Linkslavs. While his tenure ended several years ago, the connection between your family and the defendant raises serious questions about your ability to remain unbiased." The room erupted into whispers. Even the jury exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. Maya could hardly believe Lisa's bold move. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment to challenge the scales that had been so unfairly tipped against them. Judge Conrad's gavel slammed down. "Order, order in the court." The room fell silent, though the tension was palpable. The judge's glare was icy as he addressed Lisa. "Miss Carter, this accusation is both inappropriate and unfounded. I will not tolerate such baseless claims in my courtroom." Lisa didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is not a baseless claim. The connection is well documented, and I believe it is my duty to bring it to light in the interest of justice. The jury, and the public, deserve to know if there is a potential bias influencing this trial." The judge's jaw tightened. He looked as though he was about to deliver a harsh reprimand. But instead, he took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair. "Proceed with your case, Miss Carter. But consider yourself warned. This court will not entertain distractions." Lisa returned to her seat, her confidence unshaken. She leaned toward Maya and whispered, "That was just the first step. Now we put the pressure on." The day's testimony began with a critical witness, a whistleblower who had worked in Linkslav's compliance department. The witness, a nervous man in his late 30s named Daniel Grant, had come forward anonymously, but was now willing to testify publicly. His appearance in court was a gamble, but one that Lisa believed would pay off. Daniel took the stand, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. Lisa began her questioning with care, easing him into his testimony. "Mr. Grant," Lisa started, her tone gentle, "can you tell the court about your role at Linkslavs?" "I worked in the compliance department," Daniel said, his voice steadying as he spoke. "My job was to ensure that the company followed legal and ethical guidelines in its operations." "And did you observe any practices that raised concerns?" Lisa asked. Daniel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes. There were multiple instances where safety data was manipulated or withheld to expedite the release of products. Specifically, the medication in question. Internal reports highlighted significant risks, but those findings were altered to appear less severe." A collective murmur spread through the courtroom. Maya felt a surge of hope. This was the kind of testimony they needed, a direct account from someone inside the corporation. Lisa pressed further. "And who was responsible for these alterations?" "The decisions came from the top," Daniel replied. "Executives, including the CEO, were aware of the risks but prioritized profits over safety. There was immense pressure to meet financial targets. Lisa's voice grew firmer. Did you attempt to raise these concerns within the company? Yes, Daniel said. But I was ignored. When I pushed harder, I was warned to keep quiet or face termination. Thank you, Mr. Grant, Lisa said. No further questions. Victor Grayson rose, his expression sharp as he approached the witness stand. His cross-examination was calculated, aimed at discrediting Daniel. Mr. Grant, Grayson began, isn't it true that you were dismissed from Lynx Labs for poor performance? Daniel's face reddened. No, I left the company voluntarily after facing retaliation for speaking out. Grayson smirked. And yet you have no documentation to support your claims of retaliation, do you? Daniel hesitated. No, but... No further questions, Grayson said, cutting him off. He returned to his seat, his smirk firmly in place. Lisa stood for redirect, her expression steely. Mr. Grant, is it common for whistleblowers to face challenges in proving retaliation? Yes, Daniel said, his voice regaining strength. Most retaliation happens behind closed doors, making it difficult to document. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Thank you, Lisa said. No further questions. As the day wore on, the courtroom grew increasingly charged. Lisa continued to present evidence, each piece painting a damning picture of Lynx Labs' practices. Maya watched as the jury's expressions shifted, some showing clear signs of doubt in the defense's case. But Judge Conrad's behavior remained a thorn in their side. He interrupted Lisa repeatedly, sustained almost every objection from the defense, and dismissed key points as irrelevant. It was clear that he was feeling the heat from Lisa's earlier motion, and he wasn't handling it well. The tension reached a breaking point during a heated exchange between Lisa and Grayson. Lisa had presented an email chain showing that Lynx Labs executives were aware of the risks to pregnant women, but chose to downplay them. Grayson objected, his voice rising. Your Honor, this is speculative at best. Judge Conrad hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Lisa. For a moment, Maya thought he might sustain the objection, but then he surprised everyone. Overruled, the judge said, his voice clipped. The courtroom fell silent. Even Lisa seemed momentarily stunned. It was the first time Judge Conrad had ruled in their favor. Maya glanced at Lisa, who offered a subtle smile. The tide was turning, and the defense knew it. Grayson's confident facade cracked, and for the first time, Maya saw uncertainty in his eyes. As the session ended for the day, Maya left the courthouse feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. The whispers of spectators and reporters followed her, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the path ahead. Lisa caught up with her outside, her expression a blend of determination and pride. We're making progress, she said, but the fight isn't over. Maya nodded, her hand resting on her belly. I know. But for the first time, it feels like we're not alone in this. Lisa placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You've been incredible through all of this. Just a little longer, and we'll see this through. Maya smiled faintly, the weight on her shoulders feeling just a little lighter. The truth was beginning to shine through, and she was ready to keep fighting, no matter what came next. The turning tide. The courtroom was packed as Maya stepped inside, the whispers and murmurs louder than usual. News of the previous day's dramatic revelations had spread quickly, drawing even more journalists, spectators, and supporters. Maya felt their eyes on her as she made her way to the plaintiff's table. Though the weight of their gaze was heavy, it also gave her strength. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. This had become a battle for truth and justice that resonated far beyond her own story. Lisa Carter was already seated, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She looked up as Maya approached and gave a firm nod. Today we push harder, she said, her voice low but resolute. We're building momentum, and they know it. Grayson's cracks are showing. Maya took her seat, her hands resting on her rounded belly. Good, she said softly. It's time they face what they've done. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Conrad entered. He looked more stern than ever, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room before landing briefly on Maya and Lisa. Though his expression was as unreadable as always, there was a flicker of something. Unease, perhaps. Maya couldn't be sure, but it bolstered her resolve. Lisa stood to call her next witness. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Ms. Angela Moore to the stand. The name sent another ripple of whispers through the crowd. Angela Moore was a former PR executive for Lynx Labs, known for her sharp mind and polished demeanor. She had left the company abruptly 2 years ago, under circumstances that had never been publicly disclosed. Today, she would break her silence. Angela entered the courtroom with an air of quiet confidence, her tailored suit immaculate and her stride purposeful. She took the oath and sat at the witness stand, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Lisa began, her tone measured. Ms. Moore, can you tell the court about your role at Lynx Labs? I was the director of public relations, Angela said, her voice calm but firm. My job was to manage the company's public image and communication strategies. And during your time there, were you aware of any discussions about the risks associated with the medication in question? Lisa asked. Angela hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, I was part of meetings where those risks were discussed. The executives were fully aware of the potential harm, especially to pregnant women, but they chose to proceed with the product launch regardless. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Maya felt her breath catch. This was the kind of testimony they needed. Direct, unflinching, and damning. Lisa pressed on. Did you voice any objections during those meetings? Yes, Angela said. I argued that the risks needed to be disclosed to the public and that the product should be recalled until further testing was done. But my concerns were dismissed. Why were they dismissed? Lisa asked. Angela's expression darkened. Because the company had already invested millions in production and marketing. A recall would have caused a significant financial loss, and the executives decided that the risk to their bottom line outweighed the risk to consumers. Another wave of whispers swept through the room. Maya's heart pounded. Angela's words confirmed what they had long suspected but struggled to prove. Lynx Labs had knowingly put lives at risk for profit. Lisa's voice grew sharper. Ms. Moore, why did you leave Lynx Labs? Angela hesitated, her hands tightening in her lap. I was forced out, she said finally. After I continued to push for transparency, I was told that I was no longer a good fit for the company. They offered me a generous severance package, provided I signed a non-disclosure agreement. And why are you speaking out now? Lisa asked. Angela met Lisa's gaze, her expression unwavering. Because it's the right thing to do. I've lived with the guilt of staying silent for too long. People deserve to know the truth. The jury was visibly moved, their expressions ranging from shock to sympathy. Maya felt a surge of gratitude toward Angela, whose courage in coming forward might finally tip the scales in their favor. Victor Grayson rose for cross-examination, his movements deliberate. He approached Angela with a disarming smile, though his eyes were cold. Ms. Moore, he began, isn't it true that you left Lynx Labs after a disagreement with your supervisor over unrelated matters? Angela didn't flinch. No, I left because I refused to participate in a cover-up. Grayson's smile tightened. And yet, you signed a non-disclosure agreement, didn't you? Yes, Angela admitted. At the time, I was afraid of losing my career. But I regret that decision, which is why I'm here today. Grayson seized on her admission. So, you're here today out of guilt. Not because you have any concrete evidence to support your claims. Angela's eyes narrowed. I may not have documents, but I have the truth, and I'm willing to stand by it. The jury's eyes were fixed on Angela, their expressions thoughtful. Grayson seemed to sense that his usual tactics weren't working as effectively as before. He ended his questioning abruptly and returned to his seat, his jaw clenched. As the day progressed, Lisa presented additional evidence, including a financial analysis showing how Lynx Labs had profited massively from the medication despite knowing its risks. Each new piece added weight to their case, and the jury's skepticism toward the defense grew more apparent. But Judge Conrad continued to make their path difficult. He interrupted Lisa frequently, sustained objections from the defense without clear justification, and dismissed critical points as irrelevant. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that he was growing more desperate to maintain control. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a recess, Lisa received an anonymous tip, an internal memo from Lynx Labs executives discussing how to influence court proceedings in their favor. The memo mentioned Judge Conrad by name, suggesting that his familial connection to the company might ensure a favorable outcome. Lisa returned to the courtroom with the document, her expression electric. As the session resumed, she stood immediately. "Your Honor," Lisa said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I have new evidence that directly impacts the integrity of this trial." Judge Conrad's eyes narrowed. "What evidence?" Lisa held up the document. "This internal memo from Lynx Labs suggests that they have attempted to influence this court through undisclosed connections. I request an immediate review of this evidence and the potential recusal of Your Honor from this case." The courtroom erupted. Spectators gasped, reporters scribbled furiously, and the defense team scrambled to respond. Maya's heart raced as she watched Judge Conrad's face flush with anger. "Ms. Carter, this is an outrageous accusation," the judge thundered. "Do you have any idea what you're insinuating?" Lisa stood her ground. "I'm not insinuating, Your Honor. I'm stating facts. This document raises serious questions about your ability to preside impartially." Judge Conrad's gavel slammed down repeatedly. "Order, order in the court." The jury looked on, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. Maya could feel the tide turning. For the first time, the courtroom felt like a battleground where truth might finally prevail. As the session adjourned for the day, Maya left the courthouse with Lisa by her side. The reporters were relentless, shouting questions and snapping photos, but Maya ignored them. Her focus was on the fight ahead. "You did amazing today," Lisa said as they stepped into the brisk evening air. "This case is shifting, Maya. They're on the ropes." Maya placed a hand on her belly, feeling the faint kicks of her unborn child. "We're almost there," she said quietly. "For us, for everyone. They'll finally see the truth." And for the first time in weeks, Maya felt the weight of hope pressing against her heart, pushing her forward. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning in her favor. The final blow. The courthouse was a fortress of tension on the final day of the trial. Maya Henderson arrived early, stepping out of the car with a renewed sense of purpose. The brisk morning air carried a palpable charge. Every reporter, spectator, and even the opposing legal teams knew that today would determine the outcome of one of the most contentious legal battles in recent memory. Maya walked with Lisa Carter by her side, her head held high. Lisa carried a thick folder filled with their final pieces of evidence, her steps as purposeful as her expression. She glanced at Maya. "Today's the day we put it all out there. No holding back." Maya nodded, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. "I'm ready." Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Journalists lined the back rows, their pens poised. Spectators filled every seat, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and unease. Even the jury seemed more alert, their gazes sharper as they took their places. At the defense table, Victor Grayson exuded his usual confidence, but Maya noticed the tightness in his jaw and the restless tapping of his pen against the desk. His armor was cracking. When Judge Conrad entered the room, the usual command he exuded seemed diminished. His robes billowed behind him, but his gait lacked its usual authority. Maya wondered if the allegations against him, the internal memo Lisa had revealed, had begun to weigh on his conscience. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the room stood as Judge Conrad took his seat. His sharp gaze swept across the courtroom before landing briefly on Lisa, who met his stare without flinching. "You may proceed, Ms. Carter," the judge said, his tone clipped. Lisa stood, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, members of the jury, Today we will present the final pieces of evidence that reveal the full extent of Linkslav's negligence, deception, and disregard for human life. The testimony that shook the room. Lisa's first witness of the day was unexpected. A young woman named Rachel Adams, a former administrative assistant at Linkslav's. Rachel had come forward only days earlier, after the media coverage of the trial compelled her to share what she knew. Her presence on the stand was a gamble, but Lisa was confident it would pay off. Rachel, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, looked nervous as she took the oath. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. But when Lisa began questioning her, she steadied herself. "Ms. Adams, can you describe your role at Linkslav's?" Lisa asked. "I was an administrative assistant in the executive offices," Rachel said. "I handled scheduling, correspondence, and other office tasks." "Were you ever privy to conversations or documents regarding the medication in question?" Lisa pressed. Rachel hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I overheard discussions and saw emails that clearly showed the executives knew about the risks to pregnant women. They talked about how to frame the narrative to minimize backlash." Lisa leaned in slightly. "Can you give the court an example?" Rachel swallowed hard. "There was a meeting where the executives discussed a memo about adverse effects. They decided to downplay the language and focus on how the drug had transformative potential. They said any negative reports could be spun as rare occurrences." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Maya's heart raced. This testimony was devastatingly clear, a direct line to the deception at the heart of the case. "Thank you, Ms. Adams," Lisa said. No further questions. Victor Grayson stood, his expression neutral, but Maya could see the tension in his movements as he approached Rachel. "Ms. Adams," he began, his tone deceptively polite, "isn't it true that you were dismissed from Linkslav's for unauthorized access to confidential documents?" Rachel met his gaze, her voice steady. "No, I left voluntarily because I couldn't be part of what they were doing anymore." Grayson smiled thinly. "And yet you have no physical evidence to corroborate your claims." Rachel shook her head. "No, but the truth doesn't go away just because there's no paper trail." Grayson's smile faltered, and he returned to his seat without further questions. Lisa's closing evidence. With Rachel's testimony fresh in the jury's minds, Lisa moved to her final piece of evidence, a recording. It was an audio clip provided by another whistleblower, anonymous but verified by forensic experts, that captured a meeting among Linkslav's executives. In the recording, voices discussed how to neutralize lawsuits, mentioning strategies for influencing judges and discrediting plaintiffs. Lisa played the recording for the court, the voices crackling through the speakers. "We'll frame it as a PR issue, not a legal one. Spin it so the jury sees these cases as greedy people trying to exploit the system. And what about the judges? Conrad's already in our pocket. He won't be a problem." The room erupted in chaos. Spectators murmured. Journalists scrambled to take notes, and even the jury looked visibly stunned. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The memo was damning, but hearing it, hearing the cold, calculated indifference in their voices, was a visceral blow. Judge Conrad's face turned a deep shade of red, his gavel slamming repeatedly. "Order. I will have order in this courtroom." Lisa turned to him, her voice calm but piercing. "Your Honor, this recording raises serious concerns about the integrity of this trial. I formally request that this evidence be admitted and that the court consider recusal." The judge's gavel froze mid-swing. For a moment, he looked shaken, but then his expression hardened. "Ms. Carter, you've made your point. Proceed with your closing arguments." Lisa's lips tightened, but she nodded and returned to her seat. "We've planted the seed," she whispered to Maya. "Now we finish this." Closing arguments. Lisa's closing argument was a masterclass in persuasion. She spoke directly to the jury, her voice steady and impassioned. "Members of the jury," she began, "this case is about more than Maya Henderson. It's about a system that values profits over people, that sees human lives as collateral damage in the pursuit of financial gain. Lynx Labs made a choice to ignore warnings, manipulate data, and endanger countless lives. Maya is here today, not just for herself, but for every family that has been hurt by this company's greed. The evidence is clear. The testimonies are undeniable. The truth has been laid bare before you. Now, it's up to you to hold them accountable. Victor Grayson followed with his own closing argument, spinning the case as an emotional appeal rather than one based on facts. But his charm seemed to falter under the weight of the evidence Lisa had presented. The jury's eyes remained cold, their expressions unyielding. The verdict. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Maya sat in silence, her heart pounding as the foreperson stood to read the verdict. In the case of Henderson versus Lynx Labs, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The words hit Maya like a wave, washing away months of fear and doubt. Tears streamed down her face as she turned to Lisa, who gripped her hand tightly. The judge, his expression unreadable, delivered the final judgment. Lynx Labs was ordered to pay substantial damages to Maya and implement strict oversight on their future operations. More importantly, the verdict set a precedent for other victims to come forward. As Maya left the courtroom, the weight of the fight lifted slightly from her shoulders. The battle had been grueling, but justice had prevailed. Reporters swarmed her, but Maya ignored them, focusing instead on the life growing inside her. "For you," she whispered to her unborn child, "and for everyone who needed this." Lisa walked beside her, a small smile on her face. "You did it, Maya. We did it." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and resolve. The fight wasn't over. There were still others to protect, truths to uncover, and systems to challenge. But for now, she allowed herself to breathe, to hope, and to dream of a better future. The courtroom was still buzzing with murmurs as the verdict was announced. Maya Henderson sat motionless, the words in favor of the plaintiff echoing in her mind. For a moment, the weight of the fight seemed to vanish, replaced by an overwhelming surge of relief. The tension that had gripped her chest for months finally loosened, and tears streamed down her face. Lisa Carter squeezed Maya's hand. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet pride. But there was no gloating, no celebratory fist pump, only the satisfaction of knowing they had fought hard for the truth and won. Victor Grayson, the once smug attorney for Lynx Labs, sat stiffly at the defense table. His jaw was tight, and his carefully composed demeanor had cracked. For the first time, he looked defeated. Behind him, the executives from Lynx Labs whispered furiously among themselves, their faces pale and drawn. They hadn't just lost a trial. They had lost the narrative they had so carefully constructed. Judge Conrad cleared his throat, his voice steady but subdued. In addition to the damages awarded to the plaintiff, the court orders an independent investigation into the practices of Lynx Labs. The evidence presented in this case raises significant concerns that warrant further scrutiny. A ripple of approval spread through the courtroom. It wasn't just about Maya's victory. It was about holding a powerful corporation accountable for its actions. The aftermath in the courtroom. As the court adjourned, Maya stood slowly, her legs shaky from the emotional toll. The reporters surged forward, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust in her direction. Lisa immediately stepped in, shielding Maya from the onslaught. "No questions at this time," Lisa said firmly, guiding Maya toward the exit. The reporters persisted, shouting questions about the trial, the verdict, and the implications for Lynx Labs. But Maya remained silent, her focus on the door and the fresh air waiting beyond it. When they stepped outside, the cool breeze hit Maya's face, carrying away some of the suffocating intensity of the courtroom. She took a deep breath, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "We did it," Maya said softly, her voice barely audible over the commotion around them. Lisa nodded. "You did it, Maya. You stood up when so many others couldn't. This is your victory." A ripple effect. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The verdict made headlines nationwide. The story of a pregnant woman taking on a corporate giant capturing the public's imagination. Maya's courage became a symbol of resistance against greed and corruption, and her story inspired others to speak out. Victims who had been silenced by fear or financial hardship began to come forward. Class action lawsuits against Lynx Labs multiplied, and the company's stock plummeted as public trust eroded. Activists and advocacy groups rallied behind Maya, using her case as a rallying cry for reform in the pharmaceutical industry. Meanwhile, the investigation into Judge Conrad began. The leaked memo and his apparent bias during the trial were too significant to ignore. Within weeks, he was forced to step down from the bench. His fall from grace was swift and unceremonious, a stark reminder of the consequences of compromising justice. A quiet victory. Despite the media frenzy, Maya retreated from the spotlight. She returned to her modest apartment, focusing on her health and preparing for the arrival of her baby. The fight had taken a toll on her, physically, emotionally, and mentally. But she felt stronger for it. Every kick from her unborn child was a reminder of why she had fought so hard. Lisa visited often, bringing updates about the broader impact of their victory. "You've started something bigger than either of us imagined," she told Maya during one visit. "This isn't just a win for you, it's a win for every family they tried to silence." Maya smiled, her hand resting on her belly. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "I had you. And everyone who believed in me." Lisa grinned. "You gave them something to believe in. A new beginning." Months later, Maya gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope, a testament to the strength and resilience that had carried them through the darkest times. Holding her daughter in her arms for the first time, Maya felt an overwhelming sense of peace. "You're why I fought," she whispered to the newborn. "And you're why I'll keep fighting." As Maya settled into her new life as a mother, she began to consider how she could continue to make a difference. With Lisa's encouragement, she started speaking at events and advocating for stricter regulations in the pharmaceutical industry. Her story became a powerful tool for change, sparking conversations about corporate accountability and the importance of standing up for what's right. The legacy of courage. Years later, Maya would look back on her journey with a mixture of pride and disbelief. What had started as a desperate fight for justice had grown into a movement, one that had changed lives and reshaped an industry. Lynx Labs had been forced to overhaul its practices, and new legislation was passed to protect consumers from similar harm. Maya never forgot the struggle, the pain, or the fear. But she also never forgot the strength she found within herself, the support of those who stood by her, and the profound impact of her actions. As she watched Hope play in the park one sunny afternoon, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her fight had been worth it, not just for her daughter, but for everyone who needed a voice. And though the scars of the battle would always remain, they were a reminder of the power of resilience, truth, and above all, hope.